All right. Next thing we're gonna do, while you guys were working, I was playing around with a few things, and I wanted to sort of clarify, I think, some of the settings that you'd want to mess with for certain elements in order to get some effects that you would see as desirable. So largely up until now, I've been ignoring the ground plane a fair bit. So what I did was I took the wall material right here, or the floor material, I forget which one, let me see. No, I didn't like that material. I took this wall material and I duplicated it. Okay, so this one is a little funky, and this is the one that I was messing up when I was working with you guys before. But what I wanted to point out, and it's something that's very easily overlooked, obviously it's something I overlook all the time, is that we can go into these settings and play around with the meat, the color, the base, the bump maps, the texture maps, the graphics, all we want, but it doesn't mean anything unless you go to the layer and make sure that it actually is going to do something. So first and foremost, I realized that when I was messing with this with you guys before, I was trying to get the gloss and the shiny spots to really pop, but they're only going at 2.5% opacity. That's next to nothing. So if you've ever worked on Photoshop and you set something to 2.5% opacity, you can barely see it. So So, what I did was I bumped this up to like, I think it was like 30 something or something like that. And that'll give it a little bit more meat. The other thing I did was I changed the reflectance 90 down to 0, or basically like white. So that basically means wherever light is bouncing at a 90-degree angle into the lens, it's going to be the most white or the most visible. Um, that's my understanding. That's not the book definition, but that's how I understand it and how it behaves for me. So I'm going to increase the opacity mask there as well, and decrease the thing down to 92. Oh, actually, you know what? Before I do that, let me switch this back real quick and show you what it looks like in the actual view you're going to get. And this was like 2.5. And this was, I think, 5 or something. Okay, so this is the preview you get. It has a little bit of brightness, not very much shininess. So we're going to increase this up to like 30-ish. 20 is good enough. Change this down to white. Then we're going to change this up to like 30-ish. Then we're going to change this down to white. And the base color, I'm going to make a little bit darker. And then refresh. Okay, so what it gives you is this kind of like, dark, almost black color. And there's not very much light on it. But what you notice is that since I increased the opacity of the gloss and the shiny spots layer, you do see a shiny spot on this thing. But the reason you don't see very much of it is because when you go to this layer, the roughness is set to 33. If you decrease that to next to nothing, you see that you can see more of a square here. So if I decrease the roughness of this down to 0 as well, it becomes a little bit sharper. This one has 90% roughness, so you'll notice that this also has a profound effect on the color. It gets a lot lighter if I decrease the roughness of the base color. So what I think is sensible is to start looking at roughness as more of you can use it at the base, and you do need to use it at the base at the higher end, but introducing roughness at the upper levels, like a gloss layer, is something that you want to use in order to diffuse that glow. One thing that I do want to also point out is that the force Fresnel values are rather low on these. You can increase those up to 8-ish or something like that, I think. I forget exactly, but that's going to give you a more mirror-like reflection. Does that make sense? And then the thing that I want to point out about that is that as you increase the roughness of these two layers, it's going to start to diffuse that glow a little bit more. So it's going to make it look like what you would see in a more professional rendering. So you could still do that at the base level too, but it's going to change the colorization of the material. But I'd stick with increasing Fresnel. You can even increase K attenuation a little bit. And it's really going to soften that up and make it just kind of look like, you know, a shine, like kind of like a, especially with this particular material, it's going to look kind of like a sidewalk or an asphalt that's been sprayed over with water, a little bit. So we're going to keep that one. This sidewalk one, I already made this one, but I want to run through what the settings were that I used on it. So the gloss layer, I actually put the opacity mask all the way up to 50%, and I increased the ND up to 909. 9, just call it 9. I didn't really use the opacity mask for shiny spots on this one very much, so I just left it where it was. And then this one, I increased K and ND on the base layer, so it gave it this really shiny look. So that's what I did with that. So I applied the sidewalk one to my sidewalk, and I applied the asphalt one to this, but actually I'm going to apply this one instead because I like it a little bit better. It's a little shinier. And the reason we're doing this is because when we're looking at our building, I'll do a quick render while I pull up an example. When we're looking at our building, you want it to look like you're activating the ground plane. The ground plane in most renderings just kind of gets forgotten about, and the architecture gets washed out in it. We use reflections because it allows us to sort of reinforce the architecture. So what you're seeing here is the reflection of the interior lighting on the deck, which probably has like a morning dew on it or something like that. You can activate the ground plane utilizing, where was that one I liked a second ago? There you go. Using the natural lighting, but reflections work just as well. That's a terrible rendering. Shouldn't have shown you that. Right. The ground plane really does need to have some action in it in order for it to really pop and be a part of the composition of the render. What other examples do we have? Exterior is what we want to see. That's water. That's really reflective. Yeah. See, this one is just reflecting the sky, but it is really compelling. So let's go back to the render. We'll zoom out a little bit. You don't see a lot of it, but you can see that it's still kind of textured. In my opinion, it's actually a little too shiny. I should make it a little more diffuse. Let me turn this down a little. Okay, so that just allows me to get more action in the ground plane, because if you recall from my previous renders, it was feeling really flat. What you're seeing in this versus this. One of those is better. Hopefully you think it's this one. Okay, so I've got a couple other things that I want to show you on the exterior renders before I start telling you about model scale. We're not going to go full speed into model scale, but I do want you to get something set up for it. So let me switch speed here for a second. I'm going to let that render for a while, actually, and then we'll go on to that. But what other questions do you have about this right now? Okay, this is a video that I think you guys should make a note of and save, because it's going to allow you to work with stuff like this a lot better if you just focus on those particular elements that I showed you. The opacity mask of the layer, balanced with the reflectance 90 and 0, and the K and ND values, increasing the K and ND and increasing or decreasing roughness. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
The base material is the Glossy 4, or it was the new one?
The base material that I began working with? Yeah. I began working with the wall material, actually. Yeah, because I like the layer structure better. I'm probably going to toss this floor material out because I messed with it too much and I probably broke it. Any other questions? Okay.